Well, hello, everybody. This is Brant Choate, and I'm the director of the Division of Rehabilitative Programs for CDCR, otherwise known as Dr. C, the Rehabilitation Guy. You may have seen me on some of the other programs. And I am here today for our second episode with three gentlemen that run an organization called CROP. And I'm going to have them explain a little bit about what they do. But we're really here today to further a discussion that we had earlier this month and provide episode number 2 for the main purpose of providing some hope and to help you that are incarcerated to make plans for reentry and even how to better survive while you're currently incarcerated. And we talked last time a couple months ago, and since then I've learned that you guys bought a prison in Colorado. What's that all about? Because you're formerly incarcerated and then you buy a prison. So that just doesn't make sense to me.
Not something you hear every day, right?
Yeah.
So to be fair, we didn't actually buy a prison. A prison was donated to our organization. It used to be a private prison that formerly housed women and children. And, a charitable donor thought that it would be appropriate to give us possession of this facility so we can repurpose it into something new. We're in preliminary discussions right now about possibilities of what we can actually do with the space. One of the ideas that's really appealing to us is to transform it into like a data center where they might have storage units or different CPUs and processors that are used for various technological functions out here in the community.
But so you're not talking about storing people's junk or their boats and cars and things like that. You're talking about data. So that's
sure.
What does that really mean?
So it's really, on the screen right now, there's over 60 years of incarceration. And one thing that we didn't have a lot of exposure of inside is technology or like the digital landscape. And when we paroled, we realized that, that's pretty much what's going on out here. Technology runs most everything out here. And there's so much of it, in fact, that they have huge spaces that are utilized to store data, like cloud services and different security to keep data secure. So, like I said, that's just one of the possibilities we're exploring of what we actually want to do with this facility. We may be open to other ideas, but ultimately what we're going to make sure we're not doing is, housing human beings inside of it. And we're going to transform it into something else that's very useful to the community.
So will you use it for any form of training?
Ideally. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I'll take that one. Hey, I just want to preface the fact that this prison is empty. There's no women and children in the prison right now.
Everybody in and out. Yeah, it's empty right now.
It's an empty prison facility, and we all, as a team, had a chance to fly out there and rip out some of the bunks and toilets and really tear down the infrastructure from the inside, tear down some walls to repurpose the lobby area. And the idea initially is, as Jason mentioned, is to turn it into a co-location data storage cloud service facility for both consumers and for businesses. And then the other thing that's been floated to us recently is to be able to use it for formerly incarcerated people in Colorado. It's about an hour outside of Denver who can use it for fire camp training or other different types of trainings out there, and really just repurpose it for the community and turn it into something positive that people can get a benefit out other than, as Jason mentioned, just warehousing human beings.
Well, it's pretty fascinating. I know you shared a couple of videos with me where you guys were inside with sledgehammers destroying walls for the purpose of renovation. Mm-hmm. And that's got to be currently incarcerated. Maybe some of their dreams is to take a sledgehammer to the, but you were able to do that. That's great.
It was really surreal. And if I can add one thing, Brant, there was, as I was sitting there with, a toolbox of, wrenches to unscrew the bolts, I was reflecting on something that I thought it was kind of a profound thought to me. I spent over 20 years in prison. And, I would be remiss in admitting that, I would wonder often, like, how will I get out of here someday? Will I ever make it out of here? And I would like sit on this steel bunk, and I would think like it's impossible to get out of here. But when I'm sitting in this prison that we acquired, and I have these tools, like I was literally dismantling a prison. And I think it was an appropriate analogy for my thinking as well, because when you have the right tools, anything's possible. Anything's possible. It was
Well,
amazing to me how easy it was to remove those bunks with the right tools. And the same is true in my thinking, right? So if I have the right tools up here, then anything is possible for my future.
so it's kind of like a metaphor for dismantling prisons maybe even getting out of prison. And rehabilitation is one of those tools to be
Absolutely.
able to help dismantle prisons and help people successfully reenter. And you mentioned earlier that between the three of you, you have 60 years of incarcerated experience. And so you're the experts, in my opinion. And I certainly don't know what I'm talking about. And that's why I'm here talking to you. And every time we do one of these episodes, and I hope we do more, I want to have a central theme. And today I was thinking that one of the things I'm really interested in is to learn more about how people that are currently incarcerated can better withstand peer pressure within the inside. And peer pressure may not be the prison term that you use, but it strikes me that I'm speaking to three successful men that are doing great things for their community, but yet 60 years of incarceration, you must have experienced the peer pressure, but somehow you overcame that. And so talk to me a little bit about the peer pressures, and I'll start out with a broad question, which is how do you overcome peer pressure, and what are the types of peer pressure?
Sure. I'll take just a quick stab, and before I turn it over to Richard and Jason, who could speak about that more eloquently than I can. For me, peer pressure, you're right, may not be the best term for it. To me, I like to use the word culture, the culture of what happens on prison yards. And so there's ways that we can adapt and ways that we can change or elect not to buy into the everyday prison culture that exists on the yard as an individual. And I think that for me, making a personal decision for myself to do something constructive with my time allowed me to create my own culture, my own internal culture of how I was going to deal with having a life sentence in prison, and then what I wanted for myself once I got outside of prison. Because I think inherently every man and woman who sits inside of a prison cell wants something better than that prison cell. We don't always know the best way to go about it or how to go about it, given the culture of what's going on in prison, which sometimes involves peers. But it starts with self and making that decision that despite the outside circumstance, despite what's happening in the day room or in the yard or wherever, you're going to make a choice to try to take lemons, for lack of a better metaphor, and turn it into lemonade.
Great.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay. I'll go last.
Well, I think Ken pretty much nailed it. I mean, that was my experience, at least. Both Ken and I are Black, and what my experience with the Black culture in prison is that your conduct is your currency. So when I committed my crime at 20 years old, I made a relatively early decision that I didn't want to continue to bring pain and disappointment to my family. So I made a conscious decision to stay out of the way for the most part and start focusing on my education. And as a result of that decision, I actually experienced a lot of support. There was some criticism from, guys like, I started off on level 4 yard, and it's like, oh, look at this square going to school. But there was also a considerable amount of support from guys who were like, look, at the youngster's doing the right thing, so leave him alone. So in my experience, when I made the decision that I was going to start doing something positive and constructive with my time, I actually received some support. So that was my experience.
So you mentioned the conduct is your currency.
Mm-hmm.
Who is the currency with? And could it be different groups where you have currency? So I think your currency was with your family, is what you were
Sure.
talking about.
Well,
But
with my family, and it was also with the people who I lived with. I mean, uh, I am a firm believer that I'm responsible for the general context of my life. To give you an example, because I was so committed to school, it wasn't uncommon. Like, it wasn't weird for someone to come to my cell door and ask me for help with math, or to ask for some guidance in how to write a 602, right? Like, this was a context that I was intentional in creating in my life. On the other side of that, there were other people who make other choices. And, it's not a surprise when ISU is running in your cell, if you're involved in certain things, right? So that's what I mean by your conduct is your currency. The way you choose to carry yourself is essentially all that you really have in prison at any given time.
So you could also be developing currency in a negative way.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
To gain points with people that want to perpetuate negative behavior. That's a different type of currency.
Absolutely.
For me, there's a saying that we use on the crop team, and we used to do a lot of a coaching on the inside, and we asked the question, what are your highest commitments? And early on, some of our highest commitments were, I want to go along. I went along to get along. So I was more committed to being a good dude than to in prison and to get that currency from others than I was my own family, than I was for my own freedom, than I was for a college education and to get out here and one day be a responsible citizen. And at some point, when I made another decision, okay, I've failed my family, I failed society, I failed myself. I got myself 25 years to life sentence at the age of 20. I spent all of my 20s and all of my 30s in prison, and I got out at the age of 41 years old. And at some point at the end of 2000, I've been sober now from alcohol and drugs since June 10th of 2000. And I had that aha moment that one day I want to get out. One day I want to be free. I don't want to live this way in prison this whole time. I want to be free. And that's one of the things I say when I share about my incarceration experience is you got to get free in there before you could get free out here. And one of the best ways to be free is to take a stand, to plant your flag. From this point forward, my family, my freedom, and even if it's not physical freedoms, some people have 60, 80 years, and that day may not come. But for me, it was my family, my freedom, my education. And I didn't want my nieces and nephews to ever know the old me, the drug addict and the committed to a criminal way of living. So
I want to ask you about the comment that you made, go along to get along. To me, I would think that some people go along to stay safe, and maybe they're just going along with the crowd so they don't get hurt. And
right.
Did you have experiences like that where you felt like you just needed to do something
Sure.
Negative just for your own safety? And how did you overcome that?
I think it was survival based on fear. I was afraid. I was afraid. I was 20 years old, going into a level 4 prison for the first time in my life. No one in my family had ever been to prison, and I didn't know what to expect. All I wanted to know is, it's sort of like an astronaut when he's in space. The number one goal is keep the spacesuit alive, and all I know is that I wanted to live and I wanted to make it. And I didn't have all the tools that Jason talked about, the good tools yet. And I didn't know how to access them. So early on, I was going along based on fear, what other people would think of me. I wanted them to think that that I was willing to, be down or be willing, do whatever it took to just to make it in there for all those years. And what surprised me the most is when I went to the same people that I used to house with. I'm Mexican from Southern California, And when I went to them and said, hey, you know what, I want to make some changes with my life, I had fear that I would be judged or I'd be ostracized. And there was some of that, but largely there was, hey man, go get it, go get your education, go do whatever you got to do to get out of here. And it wasn't about going to another yard or anything like that. You know, anybody can change their life wherever they're at. And I did receive that support, even when there were riots going on, you know, and they said, oh, well, that's the guy, he's over there running programs, and he's in the church, and he's always working on preparing for board and facilitating groups. So, you know, we got more committed to creating a new culture, a culture of freedom and responsibility. I think that's probably the best choice to transform yourself in there, no matter where you are.
So you never went SNY?
No.
Any other thoughts on?
I think that Richard, you know, encapsulated our general perspective as far as the ability to determine our future, no matter what the circumstance is. You're looking at 3 guys who made it through prison. We were all general population, and you know, we started off in the late 90s when there wasn't a whole lot of hope for people with life sentences, and now we're all free, and we're doing good work in the community, and we're successful. And it, you know, it wasn't that prison held us back. It's that we chose to push forward in spite of the circumstance. And that's available to anybody if they really want it.
So you took control of your own life instead of waiting around.
And found other men, and you know, in women's institutions as well, but found other people who were committed to do something positive and productive with their time, that was in alignment with what I wanted for my future.
Brant, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Yes, we just had donated 500 copies of that book, and we're going to be distributing them to the reception centers, and have every brand new person coming out of the county will have the opportunity to read that book.
It's a great read.
A great read, a phenomenal book. And you know, the song that says, you know, the lights came on in Georgia, for me when I read that. And there were other books as well, but I remember Viktor Frankl, you know, he's in a Nazi concentration camp. You know, I believe everybody in his family had been killed in the concentration camps. And he said the last of human freedoms is the ability to make your choice and to have that existential freedom. And I was thinking, man, this guy's in a concentration camp. He's, you know, skin and bones. I've seen all the movies and the documentaries, and he's probably just getting a little tiny bowl of soup, or, you know, stale piece of bread, and working 12 hours a day and around other Muslims, and just death and the smell of death. And he's saying the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose your attitude. And that really affected me. And even to this day, being around on crop, we always have this saying that we say there's 2 types of people in this world, lifters and leaners. And what are you going to be? You know, you get around a leaner and you feel pulled down, you feel weighed down, you feel burdened. You get around a lifter and you feel optimistic, you feel positive, you feel, you know, pulled up. And that's the common denominator amongst all of us, is we don't spend much time on being pessimistic or negative, or looking at the bad side. We're always, you know, how can I change? How could I help somebody else? How could I be of service? Even in the AA community, one of the ways to freedom is to be of service. No matter where you're at, find a way to be of service. It truly is a way to freedom.
It sounds to me like the lifters and leaners analogy, you could actually start out as a leaner, but you need to look for a lifter. You know, find the lifter in your area, your living unit, and start hanging out with them. Yeah. And they'll help you turn into a lifter yourself.
Sure. That's a fact.
So Ken, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are mirror and parallel to what Jason and Richard said. I think at the end of the day, people have to make personal decisions and come to the realization that in order to really survive prison in a meaningful way and create that change, you have to think outside of the prison walls that are around you. One of the things that I found is that there's typically low expectation in prison. Most of us come from low expectation environments where there's not a lot expected. And when I used to talk to different guys in groups and stuff like that and talk about hopes and dreams and passions and desires and things that we want to do, typically the ceiling was very low most of the time. And it caused me to realize that, you know, people in many cases haven't had a pathway to thinking bigger and to thinking that more is possible for themselves in life. And, you know, I'm a testament. I got out, you know, after serving 24 years, had very little, and just saw a big, huge community out here of people that embraced people that have experienced imprisonment the way that I did and who wanted to make a change. There's thousands of people, men and women who are formerly incarcerated, who work for nonprofits now in California, who are working every day to make change, who have made a decision to help others, who have made a change to end systems of mass incarceration and advocate for programs, advocate for laws to change. And that work is going on every day. And really the theme of that is that people realize the world is bigger than themselves, right? And so now through this service and this work and the decisions that these men and women have made, they're able to have the lifestyle that they only dreamed about, where they have houses, where they have cars of their choice, where they have families, where they're able to take their kids on the weekend and buy the type of clothes and stuff that they want, and really just leveraging their experience in the prison system. And so I think that if people start to understand that the sky's the limit in reference to where you can take your life, and you have to come to that realization. And if you come to that realization, I think you start to leave a lot of the small thinking behind, a lot of the everyday shit that we see people thinking about, pardon my language, and really focus on self-improvement, leadership, and pursuing our aspirations on the streets.
Yep.
And I would add one more piece to that that's very important, because Richard touched on it earlier about guys that have 60 or 80 years. One of the things that impresses me about Jason and Ted, who Ted's not on the call today, he's the executive director, is both of these guys together had over 60 years to life. And through the attitude and the stuff and the decisions that they made that you've heard Jason talk about today, they were actually able to work themselves out of prison. So even though you come into prison with 30 or 40 years, right? There are people every single day. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be on a phone call tomorrow with the governor's office talking about clemency, computations, and pardons. Every single day counts for what happens to you in the future. And so if you put 5 or 10 years, 15 years in of positive programming, working, going to groups, doing all the things necessary, you very well might be sitting on a Zoom call with Brant Choate 15 years from now, talking about your sentence that got commuted from the governor, because you made a decision that you were going to have something different for your life, and that you were going to have something different for the community other than what you've had in the past.
Well, and I think it's also very interesting to hear that you're formerly incarcerated and you're going to be on the phone with the governor's office about computations. And so you're able to give back in a big way. And in some way you have a say in terms of who gets out of prison.
Well, I don't know if I have a say, but we
know,
definitely advocate for men and women who are filing for pardons and computations. And we definitely, as a community out here, have a voice. I mean, we have a very open governor in that way. And there's a lot of advocacy going on about how computations and pardons are decided. I've had conversations with the governor about the way the BPH decides to parole people and what really constitutes real threats to society versus what's not. And, you know, the legislature, for the most part, is very open to hearing people who are closest to the pain points. They realize that they don't understand everything that goes on in prison. They understand that they don't have any experience with dealing with prisoners for the most part. And so they want to hear input, real input, from people who have experienced and lived it, so they can have more informed decisions, very much like you do on a regular basis.
For sure.
So you don't get involved in individual commutations, but perhaps policy. You advise in some of the policy that's set, and they listen to you, which is great.
Exactly.
So any final messages for the man or woman that's incarcerated now and just they're fearful of doing what's right and jumping into programs and participating in rehabilitation?
I would just want to reiterate what Ken offered. One of my favorite quotes is that the investments you make in the present purchase your future tomorrow. So when I first started doing time back in 1999, there wasn't much opportunities. There weren't many programs, if any. Early 20s on a level 4, there wasn't a whole lot going on. And I still, at my best, found something positive and productive to do, whether it was read a book or, start taking one correspondence course at a time. And over time, those daily investments added up to where I'm at right now, which is free. I'm home with my family, working with my friends, doing great work for this organization and in the community. And the same is available for anyone. And the beauty about today, the current landscape of CDCR is there's an abundance of opportunities inside. There's things you can do. There's school. There's CTE programs. There's a lot of different positive things that you can involve yourselves in that will literally pave the future tomorrow.
So what was that statement that you made at the very beginning? The investment you make now?
Sure. Yes. The investments in the present purchase the future tomorrow.
Investments in the present purchase the future for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, Brant, on that note, that every one of us on this call had, the sentence that we got had it say, we're slated to die in prison. Right. I mean, I had 52 years to life. I wasn't expected to ever walk out of prison. My earliest board date when I came to prison was in 2048, the year 2048. I would have been 82 years old. And, I would just encourage people and invite people to realize that we're out here along with thousands of other people that we named advocating for changes in the law. The pendulum has kind of swung to redo or reimagine what criminal justice in California looks like. That's very real. It's happening every day. Conversations are happening every day about restorative justice and different sentencing models and et cetera and so forth. So now is the opportunity for people to really reflect for themselves about whether they want to die in prison, so to speak, or take advantage of some of the pathways that are available for them to get out and live the kind of life that they always imagined for themselves.
I've met people that have the similar sentence that you did, but they're still there. And the reason why they're still there is because early on, they chose not to participate in themselves or to invest in themselves for their future. I would imagine that's what's going on.
Yeah, it works both ways. I would conclude with this: to my brothers and sisters that are still incarcerated, there's hope. For me as a 21-year-old, when I decided to make a change with my life, I said, I'm gonna create a goal setting system. And I don't know where I got it from, but I just started writing out some crazy goals that I didn't even think were possible. I never even read a book before going to prison. I never finished one book. And I wrote down at the age of 21 that I'm gonna read 500 books. And I wrote down that I was gonna read the Bible 40 times. And I wrote down that I was gonna get my bachelor's degree. And I graduated from high school with a 1.7 GPA. I averaged a D all 4 years because I didn't apply myself. And I didn't care much, and reading books was for squares. And then I started with my first book and then my second book. And by the time I paroled, I had read 750 books, and I'd keep a log. I'd keep a log, and I'd write at least one sentence about the book, who wrote the book, the title of the book. And to this day, I can remember at least one thing about each of those different books. And then I got involved with college, and I was terrified. But my point is to immerse yourself, to think about all the good things that are available. Jason talked about there not being many programs. I remember when I got to Soledad, I was in Soledad for 18 years and 2 months. And the only program, there was AA in the cafeteria once a month. And now across that whole facility, there's like 122 different programs. And now with Prop 57 passing, there's different incentives that you can get, milestones and rack hours, and you get 80% of instead of 100% time. So I think we did the math one time, and somebody even with a sentence like mine of 25 years to life could hypothetically, you know, maybe not in a COVID world, but you know, when all things are going normal, if you push hard for 12 or 13 years, you can be getting to the board after 13, 14 years or so. So full immersion into like not only with the programs in college or vocations, book reading. You know, I've heard some guys say before as well, like, well, they don't have this program available. Well, create it. I remember when the aha moments came on for me, like man, I wish we had something like Toastmasters here. And then someone said, well, why don't we create one? We started writing letters, and we wrote to the Toastmasters International. Next thing you know, we were charter members of our fully recognized Toastmasters inside Soledad Prison. And next thing you know, we had 3 gavel clubs that were meeting after that. You know, there were that little Brant, because our waiting list was so full. So we had gavel clubs. So just a full immersion in those types of things, and then also getting around lifters, other people that are committed to the same things, and getting that perspective that what's most important. What's most important in my life today is much different than it was when I was 20 years old. And when you do that, man, there's so much that opens up for you.
Well, thanks guys for letting me come into your homes today and talk about how we can provide more hope for those that are incarcerated, and it's been an interesting topic.
I think a good topic for next time might be like the challenges of reentry, or I think that would be a good one for those that are on the verge of getting closer to getting out.
So if you're watching right now, stay tuned for the next episode of Challenges of Reentry.
Thanks, Brant.
All right.
Thanks, Brant.
Thanks.
All right, that went pretty good.